Welcome to today's lesson on equivalent fractions. We are going to start today's lesson by using the fraction bar that you see below. So let's go ahead and take a look. What fractional amount will be represented by this diagram? Well, we know that we have one part shaded out of two parts in the whole. So this fraction bar represents 1/2. So what we're going to do to find an equivalent fraction for 1/2 is we're going to break this fraction bar into more pieces. So an equivalent fraction is a number that keeps the same value or the same amount but changes the number of pieces in the whole. So let me show you what that means. We have 1/2. I'm now going to break this into fourths. So we now have 4 pieces. So when we write that as a fraction, our denominator is going to change to fourths because we now have 4 parts in the whole. How many parts are shaded in our whole? We have 1, 2. We now have 2 parts that are shaded, which means that this diagram, this fraction bar, now represents 2/4. Let's pause for a moment. Did I change the amount that was shaded in? No, we still have half of this shaded in, but we also have 2/4 of it shaded in. That means that 1/2 and 2/4 are equivalent fractions. The value stayed the same, we just changed the number of pieces. Are you ready to try one more? Let's go ahead and break this down even further. What happens if I now change my denominator into eighths and I break apart this fraction bar into 8 pieces? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces in our whole. That means I'm going to change our denominator to 8. Now, how many are shaded in? I have 1, 2, 3, 4 parts shaded in. So that means that I can also write this fractional amount as 4/8. Now, the most important thing with equivalent fractions that I want you to understand, we did not change the value. We still have the same amount shaded in. Our only difference is the number of pieces in the whole. Now that we have gone through an example together, let's go over a practice problem. Let's say that we have 2/3 of a pizza. So I'm going to write down the fraction 2/3, and then I'm going to go ahead and draw a pizza that we're going to use as our model for a fraction, and I'm going to split this pizza into thirds. So I have 3 parts. Now remember, I have 2/3 of this shaded in. So I'm going to shade in 1/3, and then I'm going to shade in another third to represent that we have 2/3 shaded in. All right, so now let's say that we want to break 2/3 into smaller pieces. Now we're not going to change the amount of pizza we have, we're just going to change the number of slices. So let's say that I split each piece into half. I'm doubling the number of pieces that we have. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces. That's 6 pieces in the whole. And how many of them are left? I have 1, 2, 3, 4 of them shaded in. So I started with 2/3, 2 out of 3 pieces. And then I cut each of those in half, and now I have 4 pieces out of 6 in all. Now what we did is we doubled the number of pieces that we have. Even though the pieces are now smaller, we have twice as many. So that leads us into our formula for finding an equivalent fraction. If you multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number, that will give you an equivalent fraction for that number. So in this case, we doubled the amount of pieces that we had. So we multiplied the numerator by 2 and the denominator by 2, and that gave us an equivalent fraction of 4/6. Are you ready to try another one? What if we multiply our numerator and denominator by 2 again? That would give us an equivalent fraction of 8/12. Well, let's see if our formula works. Let's double our number of slices again. So this time we're going to cut each of these into 2 pieces. We're doubling the number of pieces that we have. And notice I'm still cutting into the pieces that are not shaded in because we need to make sure we have an equal size in all of our fractions around. And now let's go ahead and count and see if we have 8 shaded in out of 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, look at that, our formula worked. So now that you've found that we have a formula for finding equivalent fractions, you can also see how it worked with a diagram. So let's end on one more problem. If I take 2/3 and I want to multiply it by 10, am I going to get an equivalent fraction for 2/3? Well, 2 times 10 equals 20, and 3 times 10 equals 30. So now I've created 10 times the amount of pieces in the whole. So that means that 20/30ths is equivalent to or has the same amount as 2/3. Let's go through a few together and see if you can figure them out. Let's see. Is 2/5 equivalent to 3/10? Well, let's go through and try our formula and see. We know if we multiply 5 times 2, we get 10. So our formula says we multiply our numerator and denominator by the same thing. So since we multiplied the 5 times 2, we also need to multiply our numerator 2 times 2. 2 times 2 equals 4. Uh-oh, our numerator over here isn't 4. So that means that 2/5 is not equivalent to 3/10. Let's go ahead and try another one. If we have 4/5, is that equivalent to 16/20ths? Well, let's walk through our steps together. We know we can multiply 4 times 4 to equal 16. So that means we need to multiply our denominator by 4. 5 times 4 equals 20. All right, so that means that 4/5 is in fact equivalent to 16/20ths. All right, now that you've had the chance to find equivalent fractions by multiplying the number of pieces in the whole, do you think that you can do the opposite? Here's what I mean. You'll see a fraction bar below that is split into 10 equal parts. We are going to shade in 4 of those 10 parts for the fraction of 4/10. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so our drawing, our fraction bar, is representing 4/10. So let's say that instead of making smaller pieces or more pieces like we've previously done, we want to find an equivalent fraction that has less pieces. So instead of tenths, we're going to go ahead and split each of these into fifths. So we have 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and 5/5. So we now split this fraction bar into 5 equal pieces. So I'm going to put a denominator of 5. And of these 5 equal sections, you can see that we have 2 of them shaded in. So we have 2/5 of our whole shaded in. So that means that 4/10 is equivalent to 2/5. All we did was combine pieces together to make larger pieces. So once again, we have a formula for this. Instead of multiplying our numerator and denominator by the same number, we are actually going to divide it. So we can divide 4 by 2 to equal 2, and we can divide 10 by 2 to equal 5. So instead of multiplying to get a larger number of pieces and a larger denominator, we're just going to do the opposite and divide to get a smaller denominator. All right, let's go ahead and practice together. Is 3/9 equivalent to 1/3? Now this time, since our denominator is smaller than our denominator that we're comparing it to, we're going to divide. So we know that if we divide the number 3 by 3, we get a numerator of 1. And since we divided our numerator by 3, we also need to divide our denominator by 3. So 9 divided by 3 equals 3. So that means that 3/9 is in fact equivalent to 1/3. Let's go ahead and try another one together. Is 5/20 equivalent to 1/5? Let's see. If we divide 5 by 5, we get a numerator of 1. So that means we need to divide our denominator by 5. 20 divided by 5 equals 4. Uh-oh. Our denominator over here says 5. So that means that 5/20 is not equivalent to 1/5. Let's take a moment to review what you have learned in today's lesson. We know that if we have 1/2, an equivalent fraction for 1/2 is going to be 2/4. We know this because if we draw a diagram and we have 1/2 and we shade in one out of the two pieces, that represents 1/2, 1 out of 2. If we are to split this into more parts, we still have the same amount shaded in, but we just have it in the form of more pieces in the whole. So we have 2 out of 4 pieces shaded in. We also learned today that you can use a formula for finding equivalent fractions. If you multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number, then you will get an equivalent fraction. You also can do the opposite. If you take the numerator and the denominator and you divide them by the same number, then you can also find an equivalent fraction for that number.